This is why I said last week, if you were here, my mom will buy the whole store on Black Friday, not because, she won't get one thing for herself, but she will get, you can make a whole mini Target with what she gets, but it's all for other people. I don't even buy clothes anymore. Like, I just wait for Christmas from my mom. This was Christmas from my mom I didn't even do that on purpose. I just looked down and this was Christmas gift from my mom this year. Back in Las Vegas, she had an entire closet dedicated to gifts. And it wasn't just like filled at Christmas. Like, this was like all year round. This closet, this was Santa's bottomless gift bag. So I would tell my mom, 5 minutes before my friend's birthday party, back in middle school, I forgot to buy a gift for the party we're about to go to. No problem. She would go in there. She'd come out 2 minutes later, perfectly wrapped gift, perfect gift for the person, like she had planned it for weeks. One year at Easter, however, I was about 11 or 12 years old. And my mom, she would give me an Easter basket each year. It'd have chocolates in it, little trinkets. And she would always have one thing in the basket, master gift giver. She'd always have one thing in the basket that she knew I really wanted. And that year, I was a huge Roger Clemens fan. I was a big baseball fan. How many of you know Roger Clemens, baseball pitcher, one of the greatest pitchers in all of baseball history? And I was obsessed with him at that time. He was my favorite player. And all I wanted more than anything that year, she knew, was a Roger Clemens baseball jersey. So I opened up my Easter basket and I pulled out an orange t-shirt. And my mom, she had the camera ready to go. She was just, you could see her face. She was like, just waiting to see my reaction of how excited I was about to be. And I pulled out this orange t-shirt and it had this tiger paw print on it. And not the word Clemens, but Clemson. Now, me, my dad, my brother, we just started dying laughing. We thought it was hilarious. And when we explained to my mom what happened, what the mistake was, she started crying as she felt so bad that she's crying right now. She feels bad still to this day that she messed up. But man, I held on to that shirt for years. I wore it every week for years. Why? Because first of all, it's just a really funny story. But second of all, because I knew how much effort that my mom put into this gift that she would hope I would love and would make me happy. Because the why behind the gift matters much more than the what. And this is true with fun, lighthearted gifts, such as at Christmas, birthdays, and Easter for spoiled kids like I was. But it's even more true and far more important when it comes to giving to help those truly in need. In fact, notice what Jesus says about this in Matthew chapter 6. Look in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. Jesus says, what's the next word? Careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Verse 3, but when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, Jesus is right in the middle. He's right in the heart of his Sermon on the Mount. If you've been with us as we walk through Matthew chapter 5, the introduction to the sermon, he's been unpacking what it looks like when God's kingdom, meaning God's reign and rule, what does that look like when it breaks out into the world? He's announcing in this sermon that God's long-awaited restoration project on earth has begun. And Jesus, he's forming a new kind of people who live under God's authority, who reflect God's character, and who become a living, breathing picture of heaven coming to earth. So what does that kind of life, living for God's kingdom, what does it look like? Well, he showed us in chapter 5 that obedience to God as our King isn't just about avoiding sin, but becoming the kind of people who live in step with the very heart of God. And now in chapter 6, Jesus makes a subtle but important shift, not just focused on what we do, but why we do it. To help us see the difference, he's pointing out between what we might call a hollow, shallow, surface level religion, rather than a real, authentic, kingdom-centered devotion. He gives us 3 examples at the beginning of chapter 6. And they're all examples of everyday spiritual practices. The first one he highlights, we're going to look at this morning, and it is the practice of giving to those in need. So this morning from Jesus' teaching, I want you to consider with me 3 key principles that should shape the way we give. Number 1 is this. Jesus says, when you give, number 1, caution your motives. Caution your motives. Look at verse 1 again. Be careful not to practice your, what's the word? Righteousness. We have a few different Bible versions. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Now, if you've been with us in this series, Jesus has used this word righteousness several times already. And as we've said before, what does this mean? Well, it's not a general word for morality or generally being a good person. It's very specific. It's a relationship word. It's specifically a reference to being faithful in our relationship with God and in relation to other people. Righteousness. So Jesus warns us here. He says, be careful, take caution that you don't show off your right relationship with God in front of other people. In other words, don't turn your faithfulness to God into a fanfare before others. Again, he's not talking about what we do, but why we do it. He's addressing not the means, but the motives behind our religious habits. And we see this especially in a word he uses in the very next verse. Look at verse 2. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the what? Hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Now, the word hypocrisy here doesn't mean what we think it means. Today, we call someone a hypocrite if they say one thing, but they do something else. It's your friend who lectures you about eating healthy and swears that they never eat fast food. And the next week you're in the car with them, and what do you find? You find a McDonald's wrapper stuffed between the cushions of the back seat. It's the do as I say, not as I do mentality. This is how we use hypocrite, but in the Bible, this is not what hypocrite means. It's similar. In the Bible, the hypocrite, it's actually a Greek word, it's transliterated, meaning it's a Greek word that we just use English letters to pronounce it. And it literally means a stage actor. It means hippo, means under, and crit, it's reference to speaking in some way. It's someone who talks from under or behind a mask. Hypocrite. It's someone who wears a mask on stage and plays a role. So when Jesus uses the word hypocrite, he's not calling out people who fail to live up to what they say. These are people who do all the right things. They give to the poor, they pray often, they fast regularly, to use the three examples that Jesus uses. They're acting the part of a devoted follower of God, and they're doing it well. But the issue isn't their actions, it's their motives. They're performing. They're pretending, not with their habits, but with their hearts. They're doing the right things, but for the wrong reasons. And of all places Jesus could start with, there's several habits, and he does mention several here, but he begins, the first one he wanted to address is the motive behind our generosity towards those in need. Now think about it. Fasting and prayer, these are the next two he talks about that we'll talk about in the coming weeks. These other two practices Jesus addresses, they're acts of worship directed toward who? Fasting and prayer. These are directed to God. But giving stands out from these other two because it's directed toward people. We give to people. So this raises an important question. It seems like these two don't fit. This one doesn't fit in with the others. So the question is this: when we give, who's the audience? Is giving to the poor about doing right by God or doing right by others? Well, listen to what Solomon says in Proverbs 14, verse 31. He says, "Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker. But whoever is kind to the needy honors God." In other words, the way you relate to the poor is how you relate to God. And then listen to Proverbs 19:17. He says, "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. And he," who's he? The Lord. "And he will reward them for what they have done." So giving to the poor, according to this proverb, is to give to God himself. It's literally, it's likely that Jesus had this in mind when he said these words: those who give to be seen by others already have their reward. And he says in the next verse, he says, "And they will receive no reward from God." Why? Because it's not the person in need who will repay you back when you give to the needy. But according to this proverb, it's trusting that God will repay you for lending to him by giving to the one in need. So Jesus is expressing a worldview in which when there's someone in my community who's in need, how I relate to that person is how I relate to God. And this is revolutionary stuff in its day. It might not seem so to us. Why? Growing up in a culture saturated with Jewish and Christian values, we already take this for granted. It's called human rights. Or at least this is the secularized version of the biblical idea of the imago Dei, this idea that everyone, every human, no matter who you are, we have equal value because we're all created in the imago Dei, the image of God. But as this idea began to spread beyond just Israel from the Old Testament into Greek and Roman culture through the early church, as Jesus' teachings were popularized and spread around the world, this idea was so revolutionary that it gave rise to institutions that we now take for granted, like hospitals, orphanages, food banks. These were Christian contributions to Western civilization based off of this value. So this idea of giving to the poor, this is a great thing. Like, Jesus isn't condemning this. He's not telling us to do anything differently. But Jesus says, be careful. Be cautious as to why you do this. So the question here isn't, do you give to those in need? In fact, that's actually assumed. That's assumed in the text. The question is, when you give, what's your motive? Is it truly an act of worship or a way to be watched? Are you truly seeking to honor God by giving or to be honored by others? For example, back at the Bible college I attended in California, believe it or not, California, the mayor of our city was a committed Christian. And he was also a very wealthy individual, and he was friends with the president of the college. And during my junior year, the college was raising funds for a brand new multi-million-dollar basketball gym. Now I remember hearing that the mayor of our town had made a bold offer. He would pay for the entire project up front, out of pocket. It's awesome, right? It's one of those situations you're like, man, praise the Lord has provided, Jehovah Jireh. But he had one condition. The condition was that the building had to be named after him. He was happy to give his earnings to others, but only if it would earn him praise from others. Sometimes it's not about a plaque we get from giving, but the power that comes with that honor. We give to an organization so we can influence the board and get our way. And Jesus says, hey, you may accomplish your objective. You may gain that honor and the power you're seeking. He says, but don't seek any honor from me. Now, let's be honest, these are scenarios that most of us aren't going to face because most of us here don't have enough money. We'll never have enough money to get our name on anything other than a casserole dish left behind at a church potluck. For the rest of us, this temptation is still here, though in different ways. We may not have money enough to put our name on a building, but maybe the little we have, we give in certain ways still so that people will think we're generous. The amount doesn't matter, it's what's the heart behind it. It might be sliding into a service role at work or at church, not out of a heart to serve, but because someone important might notice. Or it might look like refusing to serve at all unless it comes with a title, a platform, or some kind of recognition. It's giving a gift, but expecting something in return. Maybe it's influence, maybe it's a thank you, maybe it's a favor down the road. And remember, the act isn't wrong. It's the heart behind it. So Jesus isn't saying, don't be generous. He's saying, be careful. It's not a problem if you gain honor with people because of your generosity. If you're a generous person, that's going to happen most likely. It's not a problem, Jesus says. But be careful, he says, to check your motives. Then number 2, when you give, check your methods. Check your methods. Look again at verse 2. He says, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. If you want to climb the ladder of success here in America, you can do what? You can step on whoever you want. Man, you can act like a jerk, and you could still end up at the top with millions of dollars, public respect, and a powerful platform. That's how it works here in our beautiful country. But in ancient Israel, where the religious powers held the authority, the path to honor and influence wasn't built on wealth or power. It was built on righteousness. And in a society where Social Security and government welfare were where they didn't have that, caring for the poor, this wasn't just an optional value or virtue, but this was essential. So volunteer charity and generosity toward the needy, this was central to Jewish life, and thus it was seen as one of the highest and best ways to gain power and influence in Jesus' day. You want to be powerful, you want to be influential, you want to have honor by the people in Israel? You give to the poor. You blow a trumpet in the middle of the street, in the middle of the town square to draw a crowd to your attention that others would notice. Now, we don't know if this is something that scholars aren't quite sure. Is this something people actually did, or was Jesus just using kind of this exaggerated metaphor of blowing trumpets? We don't know, but we do know the problem of literal trumpet blowing in our day when we give. This isn't an issue. But there are plenty of modern ways that we toot our own horns today. Maybe we post about our generosity online with just the right caption, with just the right filter to make sure people know that we are on mission, on trend, and on everybody's feed. We volunteer for the roles that get the most visibility, not the ones that require the most humility. We talk more about what we do for others than about what God has done for us. We give generously, but we do it in a way that ensures that others notice. And how does Jesus say we're supposed to give instead? Look at verse 3. He said, don't go blow trumpets in the street as the hypocrites do, these actors. Verse 3, but when you give to the needy, do not let your, what? Left hand, for you guys it's this one, know what your right hand is doing. Now, Jesus' language here, this is obviously figurative. The only way this could literally be true is if somebody who has a lobotomy, you literally disconnect the left side of the brain from the right. I don't think that's what Jesus is teaching us here. But also, here's something else he's not saying. He's not saying that we shouldn't keep track of our giving or be wise with our finances, as Jesus isn't condemning stewardship, but showmanship. So what does Jesus mean? What does this mean? Don't let your left hand know what your right hand means. How could they not know what the other's doing? He means that your giving should be so quiet and so humble that it's not even a big deal to you. No applause, no overthinking, just obedience from the heart. He's saying give in such a way that you not only avoid applause from others, but where you're not even congratulating yourself. See, Jesus knows just how quickly our motives can get turned upside down, and sometimes without us even realizing it. So he says, hey, be intentional about something. Be intentional about giving in a way that's almost unstrategic, where you don't have a strategy to get a plaque or a pat on the back. And again, he's not saying to be disorganized or be irresponsible with your finances. He's saying don't let your generosity be organized in a way that you have another motive. In other words, don't play the game. And the truth is the game can be played in all kinds of different ways. For example, we can flip the script so much that now the way to gain honor is by giving anonymously. But even that can become a new version of the honor shame game where people feel guilty now for if you mention how you help someone, even when it might encourage others. Because sometimes hearing other people's radical generosity, it inspires us. In fact, remember the words of Jesus. Now, follow me on this, because it might sound like or even Jesus is contradicting himself. Remember the words of Jesus earlier in the sermon, Matthew 5:16. He said, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This has become a theme for our church. We want to be a light for Lilburn. But do these two verses contradict each other? Matthew 6:1 and Matthew 5:16. Well, let me read again. So Jesus says, be a light, let others see your good deeds. But then look in verse 1 of chapter 6 again. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. Now, question, is that where Jesus stops? No. Now, if we stop right there, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. We stop there, then it might sound like this is a contradiction. We're going to misunderstand what Jesus is saying, so he qualifies it. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. And again, at first, this still may seem like a dilemma because doing right by other people usually requires you to be around other people. So this is going to be tricky when I bring a casserole over to someone in my small group who they just broke their leg and they can't cook dinner. And so what do we do? It's like, hey, look away. Don't watch me. Is that what Jesus is saying here? I don't think so. This phrase, to be seen by them, it doesn't mean we can never be seen doing good. It means don't do good for the purpose of being seen. See, the problem Jesus is addressing here isn't visibility, it's vanity. In fact, Paul said it this way in 1 Corinthians 1:11. He says, imitate me as I also imitate Christ. This was the model of discipleship that Paul taught to the Corinthians. He says, what he's saying is, watch me do good things. Why? So you can learn to do it too, and others will watch you do it. So it's not bad that other people would see you trying to be faithful to Jesus, but catch this, just don't start performing for the crowd. For example, how many of you are bad Baptists because you are good dancers? Where's my good dancers in here? Okay, you're all good Baptists. Wow. No one wants to admit it. I was just kidding, guys. Liars, that's right. We have an altar call at the end of our service today. Well, for me, growing up in an independent Baptist church where dancing was considered a sin, I didn't learn how to bust a move. I learned how to button a suit jacket at the age of 6. So when I got married to the dancing queen herself, I tried so hard to dance with her like a normal human being for our first few years of marriage. And just not completely embarrass myself or embarrass her for marrying me. I tried, but my brain just would not listen to my body. It wouldn't let my body go. I was self-conscious how bad I was dancing, that all I could think about while dancing was now how bad she must think I was doing about dancing. Now, I'm still not a good dancer by any means. Some of you guys see me during worship and you're like, yeah, I know. But I realized this. I realized after having enough dance parties in the kitchen with our kids that the only way to dance and not be completely awkward, some of you Baptists, let's take notes here. The only way to not be completely awkward when you dance is to completely stop thinking about what everyone else around you is thinking about you dancing. I hear a affirmation from the dancing queen. So, and listen, once I let go of that, once I let go of what other people around me were thinking about how I was dancing, catch this, I also stopped thinking so much about what I was doing when I was dancing. I wasn't overanalyzing my moves anymore. I was just grooving to the beat, bluey dance songs and the like. You could say that my right hand stopped knowing what my left hand was doing. See, before I was performing for the crowd, and it left me looking like a moron. But when I stopped focusing on how others would react and started only thinking about and listening to the rhythm of the beat, it was like everything else faded away. And it just becomes this free form, unashamed, unfiltered, unabandoned joy. And that is what Jesus is inviting us into when it comes to giving. Not something stiff or staged or calculated, but something that flows from a heart in rhythm with the Father. So when you give, check your methods. Check your methods. But Jesus gives us one more. He says, when you give, number 3, he says, consider your reward. Look again at verse 4. He says, don't let your right hand even know what your left hand is doing. Why? So that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So, if helping those in need with the motive, if you do it with the motive of being seen, verse 2 says, he says, you have been already given your reward in full. He says, we've been honored by those who saw us, and he says, that's all the honor you're going to get. In other words, you can do the right things in public that would gain you public honor, but actually, he says, you have no real honor before God if it's for the wrong reason. In essence, Jesus is saying, be careful what you wish for. Because if that's what you came for, he says, you're going to get it, but you're settling less than what the Father wants for you, what you could have. Because notice, he doesn't say, Jesus never says that we shouldn't seek a reward at all for giving. Never says that. In fact, he assumes that we will seek a reward. He just wants it to be the right reward. So Jesus isn't rebuking the desire for reward, he's redirecting it. He wants us to long for the reward that matters. Not the applause of people, but the approval of our Father. Not a fleeting compliment, but a lasting crown. In fact, this is what Paul says, and his desire is in 2 Timothy chapter 4, at the end of his life, he says, I have fought the good fight. He says, I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. So what now? He says, now. He says, there is in store for me the crown of righteousness. Notice the word righteousness. He says, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, he says, but to you. He says, to all those who have longed for his appearing. Paul wasn't ashamed to look forward to his reward for being faithful. Why? Because he didn't run for the crowd. He ran for the crown. So if God isn't condemning the desire for reward, what is he looking for? He's looking at the heart, at your why, at your joy in giving, not just the act itself. This is why Paul also wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, he says, each one must give, how? as he has decided in his heart. He says, not reluctantly or under compulsion, not, I guess I got to give to this person in need. I guess I'll go help them out. I guess, they're going to be mad at me. He says, don't give if that's the case. He says, do it as you've decided. Do it what's from your heart, for God loves a cheerful giver. God doesn't want guilt-driven generosity. He's not after performance or pressure. He's after joy-filled, spirit-led, heart-level giving. And Jesus says that the Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you. And he's not just talking about a pat on the back, good job. It's a reward rooted in relationship. One given by a Father who knows your heart, even if no one else does. By a Father who sees your sacrifice and is honored by your faith. By the way, this isn't prosperity gospel teaching, if you're familiar. We talked about that in a series this last summer. Why? Because the prosperity gospel says, expect your reward when? Now. Give to others now, and you'll get health and wealth in return. But the true gospel says this: give now, suffer now if need be, and you will share in all of God's glory with Jesus in the next life. Not comfort now, but Christ now, and a crown later. Now, sometimes, even in this life, there will be blessings for following Jesus. There's the principle of sowing and reaping. That's true for this life. But other times, following Jesus means sacrifice. It means giving to someone in need and feeling the cost. It means losing something in this life, or even losing our own life. It means exactly what Jesus did for us on the cross. He didn't hold on to heaven's comfort, but he gave. He suffered. He lost so that we could win and have a great reward. We know that wasn't the end of the story for Jesus. But because he rose from the dead into glory on that third day, he says we can enjoy that reward with him. That we can experience his resurrection with him. We can look forward one day to that reward. So Jesus is really clear. You will be rewarded. The question is, by whom? Will it be the crowd that claps and forgets tomorrow, or your Father in heaven who sees what no one else might see, but he'll never forget? Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, we give to others. We only can because you have given to us, and we want to stop and thank you for your gift to us. Lord, help us not only to be faithful in giving to those around us in need, but help us, Lord, with this area of our heart. Lord, would you align our hearts with you, that we would serve, that we would give to those in need out of joy, out of love and thankfulness for you. And we ask this in your holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen.